Drink up. It'll help with the nerves, Craig said, his voice a little too smooth as he slid the travel mug across the counter. I stared at it. It was my mug, the one I bought with my first freelance check. Matte black, scratched around the base, the lid slightly warped from too many cycles through the dishwasher. But it wasn't the mug that set my stomach on edge. It was the smell. The coffee inside was wrong. Bitter, yes, but something else too. Chemical, metallic, like pennies soaked in burnt espresso. Thanks, I said, forcing my voice steady. I'll take it to go. He leaned against the kitchen counter, arms folded like he was inspecting a piece of lumber. Big day, he added with a slow grin. Wouldn't want anything getting in your way. I nodded, slipping the mug into the side pocket of my bag and grabbing my portfolio. My tie felt too tight. Craig's eyes stayed on me the entire time, unreadable but intense. The kind of look that says more in silence than most people do in paragraphs. Mom had already left for her nursing shift. The house was quiet. Just me, him, and that mug of coffee still clinging to my palm with a weight that felt heavier than it should have. I walked toward the door. You sure you don't want to drink some before you go? Craig called out behind me. Might take the edge off. I turned back briefly, offering a smile that didn't touch my eyes. I'll be fine, he held, my gaze for a beat too long. That was Craig's game, always pushing just far enough to make you feel paranoid, then pulling back like nothing had happened. A joke, a misreading, my imagination. Outside, the sky was slate gray, and the wind bit through my blazer as I walked to my car. I opened the passenger door, set my bag down, and pulled out the mug again. Cracked the lid just slightly. The smell hit harder now, sharper. My stomach turned. I stood there, hand frozen on the doorframe, heart ticking louder than the birds in the trees. Then I slid the lid shut again. I didn't know what was in that coffee. But I knew Craig. And I knew he didn't want me to leave this house today as anything more than a failure. After college, the plan had been simple. Move home for 3 months, save money, and get out. 3 months turned into a year and a half. Not because I wasn't trying, but because the economy was rough, and entry-level marketing jobs in Missoula were few and far between. I told myself it was practical, strategic. I could work freelance. Contracts, build my portfolio, and be gone before I wore out my welcome. But somewhere along the line, that welcome began to feel conditional. Conditional on staying small. Craig never shouted, never slammed doors. His disapproval came in the form of smirks, half-jokes, and questions phrased like compliments. Another? Gig, huh? What's that bring in, $50? Back in my day, we earned our pay with our hands. Or, you work late on those little picture projects again last night? That marketing thing must be more complicated than I thought. He'd say it with a grin and a beer in his hand, as if that made it harmless. But the grin never reached. His eyes. Mom always tried to smooth it over. He just worries about you, she'd say, folding laundry on the couch while I scrolled through job listings. His dad was old school. Tough love, you know? I didn't respond. She meant well. She always did. But love, in Craig's case, came laced with corrosion. You didn't notice it at first. It worked slow. Like water under paint. The house felt smaller the longer I stayed. Craig started locking the garage when he went out. The Wi-Fi randomly cut out during my Zoom interviews. Once my alarm didn't go off before a big phone call with a client. I checked my phone later. The alarm had been turned off. Not snoozed. Disabled. Technology, huh? Craig had muttered when I mentioned it. Unreliable. Even Mom had, started repeating that line. I tried not to blame her. She'd worked double shifts my whole childhood to keep the lights on. If Craig brought her a little rest, a little companionship, maybe that was enough for her. But for me, it was starting to feel like a cage. One built not with bars, but with doubt. It was only in hindsight that the pattern made sense. At the time, each moment felt like ordinary bad luck. An alarm that didn't go off before a virtual interview with a boutique agency in Portland. Glitchy internet connection that cut out halfway through a video call with a recruiter in Bozeman. A portfolio file mysteriously missing from my laptop the night before a pitch meeting. I blamed the cheap router, my own forgetfulness, or even just nerves. But now, driving toward the biggest opportunity I'd had in over a year, with a mug of strange-smelling coffee cooling in the cup holder, I saw it for what it really was. Sabotage. Subtle, steady, intentional. Craig was never loud about it. That wasn't his style. He operated in the margins. Small, precise cuts to your confidence, to your chances, until you started believing that maybe you weren't trying hard enough. Maybe you didn't want it bad enough. Maybe the world really was stacked against you. Remembered the day I found the bottle in his truck. A short, wide container tucked between old receipts and tools. No label. Just powdery residue clinging to the inside like smoke. I didn't say anything. I didn't even take it. Just memorized its shape and the way it smelled faintly of sleep aids and something chemical. That was 2 weeks ago. Now, with a half hour before my Granite Peak interview, that same smell rose from the travel mug he'd pressed into my hand with a too-easy smile. Special blend, he'd called it. Good for nerves. No thanks. At the next gas station, I pulled in and popped the lid. The liquid shimmered with an oily sheen. It was darker than my usual brew, almost black-blue at the surface. I didn't hesitate. I poured it into the trash, watching it vanish into paper and grease. I wasn't about to let this be another accident. Not today. This interview wasn't just about a job anymore. It was about getting out. Getting free. Craig had spent the last year trying to convince me I wasn't ready for the world. What he didn't know was, I already belonged to it. The gas station was barely 2 blocks from home, but it felt like crossing a border. I pulled, in slow, the morning traffic humming behind me, and parked beside the rusted trash bin next to the pump. The mug sat in the passenger seat like a question. I picked it up, unscrewed the lid, and tilted it. The coffee poured out thick, slower than it should have. Not syrupy, but viscous. It hit the trash with a wet thud, spreading into the grease-stained paper wrappers like ink on blotting paper. A faint sheen shimmered on top, rainbow-like chemical. I stared at it for a long moment. That was the last test I needed. I tossed the mug in, too. I didn't want to carry it anymore. Inside the store, I bought a small black coffee, no sugar, no cream, and walked out with my head clear and my steps steady. The cup was warm in my hands, the smell sharp and honest. No metallic edge, no questions. I sipped it slowly in the parking lot, letting my breath slow. Then I opened my phone and flipped through my calendar. Not for appointments, but for memories. There was the morning my alarm didn't go off before a remote client call. My phone still set to vibrate even though I remembered checking it twice. The day my laptop shut down mid-interview after a phantom software update. The time my resume file vanished overnight. Reappeared corrupted, then vanished again. Craig blaming a virus he read about online. I saw it now clear as day. A campaign of small sabotages. Invisible wires looped around my ankles while I tried to move forward. I finished the coffee as the clock inched toward 10. The Granite Peak offices were only 10 minutes away. I stepped into the building 30 minutes later, portfolio in hand, wearing the same suit Craig once said made me look like I was playing businessman. The receptionist smiled. "You're early." "Good things deserve preparation," I replied. Inside, in the waiting room, I didn't rehearse, I reflected. Because this wasn't about proving anything to Craig anymore. This was about proving something to myself, and I was already doing it. 3 hours later, I stepped out of Granite Peak's glass-walled lobby, with the job offer folded neatly in my pocket. The marketing director had shaken my hand and said they'd been waiting for someone. Like me. I don't remember much of the interview itself, just the quiet clarity that had carried me through every question. Like I already belonged there. The late afternoon sun caught the snow-tipped hills in gold as I pulled into the driveway. I was still holding on to that stillness, that sense of something shifting, but the moment I opened the front door, the air changed. A sour, acidic stench hit me first, something sharp and familiar beneath it. Coffee. My coffee. Craig was slumped on the Living room couch. A plastic bucket between his knees, his face pale and clammy. His shirt clung to his back with sweat, and a thin line of vomit streaked the edge of his mouth. The mug, my stainless steel travel mug, sat on the end table next to him. Empty. He looked up slowly, his eyelids heavy, pupils dull. His expression shifted when he saw me. Shock, then confusion, then something darker. Accusation, maybe. "You're back," he mumbled, voice hoarse like rusted metal. Early, I walked in calmly, setting my bag down by the door, letting my coat slide off my shoulders. My heart didn't race. My voice didn't crack. "They offered me the position," I said simply. "I start Monday." Craig didn't answer. His mouth opened, then closed again. He doubled over, coughing into the bucket. From the kitchen, I heard the faucet turn off. Mom stepped into the doorway, drying her hands on a dish towel, her brows furrowed with concern. "You're home. How'd it go?" "They offered it to me on the spot." Her whole face lit up. She crossed the room in 3 strides and wrapped me in a tight hug. "I knew it," she whispered. "I'm so proud of you." Over her shoulder, I watched Craig. He wasn't looking at us, just staring at the floor like it had betrayed him. I didn't need to say anything more. That coffee had been meant for me. But Craig had taken the first sip. That night, the house was quiet, the kind of silence that follows something heavy, like a storm passing through, leaving the air thick with questions no one dares ask out loud. Craig had retreated to their bedroom. An hour after dinner, still pale, still moving like every muscle ached. Mom didn't mention it. She just smiled at me across the table, eyes soft with pride. We both knew something had changed, though neither of us dared name it. Once the dishes were done and she went to bed, I slipped into my room and closed the door behind me. I opened the bottom drawer of my desk, the one with the loose handle. Beneath a pile of college notebooks and old receipts was a small, opaque bottle. The label was long gone, worn away from years of being tucked into glove compartments or coat pockets. But I knew what it was. I'd found it 3 weeks ago in the back of Craig's truck while digging for jumper cables. Recognized the weight, the faint rattle, the shape of the pills, sleep aids, prescription grade, the kind used in hospitals and care homes, too strong for over-the-counter use, dangerous when crushed, especially if someone had mixed it with something else. I unscrewed the cap and tipped one of the tablets into my hand. Small, white. Powdery residue clung to the sides of the bottle, just like the bottom of that coffee mug. I hadn't switched. The mugs. I hadn't needed to. Craig had probably gone back into the kitchen after I left, topped off his own cup from the same pot, maybe even used the one meant for me. The irony was so sharp it almost made me laugh. He'd made his own poison. I set the bottle back in the drawer but didn't close it. I let it sit there, open and visible. Not as a threat, not as leverage, as proof. Proof that I hadn't imagined it, that the sabotage was real, that Craig had crossed a line, and now he'd tasted the consequences. For the first time in over a year, I slept through the night. She knocked on my door just after 10. I was sitting cross-legged on the floor, packing books into a cardboard, taping the edges slower than necessary, stalling really. When I looked up, her face was pale, eyes red-rimmed like she'd already been crying. "Can we talk?" she asked. I nodded and set the box aside. She sat on the edge of my bed the way she used to when I was a kid with a fever. Only now, the warmth in her eyes was laced with something else. Uncertainty, fear. Craig told me. He said you've been acting strangely, that you left a note in his toolbox, she said slowly, watching my face. He said it felt threatening. I didn't react, just reached into the drawer and placed the small white bottle in her hand. The one I'd found, in Craig's truck. The same bottle I'd compared to the residue in the mug. She blinked at it. "What is this?" "Prescription sleep aids, strong, not his, not yours, just tucked in his glove compartment, no label. I found it weeks ago." Her brow furrowed. "That doesn't prove anything." "Maybe not on its own," I said quietly. "But it lines up with a pattern. The morning of the interview, that mug wasn't for encouragement. You didn't smell it, but I did. Bitter, metallic, wrong. Then he got sick, and I didn't. She stared at me, lips pressed tight. He made that coffee for me, Mom, I said, voice calm. He didn't mean to drink it himself. She looked down at the bottle again. You think he tried to drug you? I think he's been sabotaging me for months, I said. Missed alarms, files gone, Wi-Fi mysteriously failing, always. Before something important. Always with some passive comment after. Technology, huh? She shook her head, slow and trembling. He wouldn't. When was the last time you saw a bank statement? I asked. Her eyes lifted to mine. Let the silence hang. You're careful with money, I continued. But last month I saw a bank notice your account was overdrawn. The tears started then. Not the loud kind, just the silent cracking of someone finally seeing what's been in front of them all along. Show me everything, she whispered. It was late Thursday when she came into the kitchen. The lights were, I was spreading peanut butter on toast, trying to find normalcy in small things. She closed the fridge quietly and leaned against the counter, her voice barely a whisper. I opened a new account today, she said. Transferred what was left of my savings into it. I froze mid-swipe. How much was left? She paused. About $7,000. My stomach dropped. How much was there? I asked, even though I already knew what she was going to say. Almost. 27, she whispered. 3 years ago. I set the knife down. She wasn't crying. That's what scared me the most. Her face was still hollow, like something in her had been quietly pulled loose and hadn't snapped back. He's been pulling cash, she continued. Small amounts, just under the notification threshold. ATM withdrawals mostly. Sometimes tools, but ones he never used. Trips he said were covered by his buddies. I nodded slowly. Every moment of the past year clicking into place. The new fishing gear, the odd weekend getaways, the way he always discouraged her from checking the accounts. Too stressful, he'd said. And the paperwork? I asked. Forged, she said, voice tight. The bank checked signatures. He'd been faking mine. She took a breath. I called a lawyer, meeting Monday. Do you want me there? No, she said, and there was no weakness in it. I need to do this myself, but I wanted you to know, you were right. For a moment, neither of us moved. The sound of the fridge humming filled the silence between us. Then she looked up, eyes steady now, fire beginning to kindle behind the hurt. This was never just about you, I said quietly. He wasn't just trying to keep me here. He wanted us both trapped. Benedict nodded. He took our trust, our time, my savings. I won't let him take anything else. I'd never been more proud of her than I was in that moment, and as I watched her walk out of the kitchen, her shoulders straighter, her back unbowed, I realized something. We weren't victims anymore. We were witnesses, and we were building our case. It was almost sunset when I walked into the garage, cardboard box tucked under my arm, last few things packed tight inside. Craig's truck sat where it always did. Hood up, tools scattered like shrapnel across the workbench. I found his toolbox open, sockets glinting under the single bulb overhead. I slipped the folded note between the wrenches. No flourish. No signature. Just 9 words scribbled on a scrap of legal pad. Whatever you were hoping to ruin didn't work. I turned to leave. That's when I heard him behind me. So you think you're clever? Craig stepped into the doorway, beer bottle in, and his voice wasn't angry. It was something colder, more calculating. I didn't flinch. Just set the box in the trunk of my car. You think a little job offer makes you untouchable? He said, taking a swig. Jobs fall through, especially for people who get distracted, show up late, seem impaired. I met his gaze. Not, great idea to threaten someone in a garage, I said, voice calm, especially when the bank is reviewing forged withdrawal slips with your name on them. His face twitched. And when unprescribed pills show up in someone's system, I added, it raises questions. About intent, about endangerment. You don't know what you're talking about, he said, but the words had lost their teeth. Maybe, I shrugged. But Mom's lawyer might. He took a step forward, but I didn't back down. His shoulders, once squared with confidence, sagged slightly. For the first time, he looked small, not because he was shorter or weaker, but because I wasn't playing his game anymore. I turned to close the trunk. "She's already opened her own account," I said over my shoulder. "Had a long talk with the bank, and she's got the documents." "You've poisoned her against me," he muttered. "No," I said, facing him one last time. "You did that all on your own." Then I walked past him and into the house. Hands weren't shaking. My breath was steady. Whatever this had been, whatever years he'd spent undermining, manipulating, isolating, it ended here, in oil-stained concrete and silence. I wasn't afraid of Craig anymore, and he knew it. Next morning, I was sipping coffee in the kitchen when Mom stepped in, hair still damp from her shower, eyes clearer than I'd seen in years. She didn't fidget, didn't glance toward the living room where Craig was watching the morning news. She just walked over, placed her hand on the table and said, "It's done." I looked up. "What do you mean?" "I've frozen the joint accounts. Talked to the bank manager directly. He's seen the withdrawal pattern and flagged 11 suspicious transactions for internal audit. I also printed every document I could find and locked them in my filing cabinet. Craig no longer has access to a single dollar of mine." Her voice was steady. "Surgical. And the house?" I asked. "I transferred the utilities to a new account in my name and contacted our attorney. We're meeting again Monday." For a second, I didn't speak. I just watched her. This woman who'd spent years smoothing over conflict, second-guessing herself into silence. Now she stood still and tall, not loud, not angry, just resolute. "You don't have to do this alone," I said finally. "I can stay a few more days, help you through the paperwork, the lawyer meetings." "No," she cut in gently but firmly. "You need to start your life, Andrew. You've waited long enough. I let him shrink both our worlds, and I won't let that happen to you anymore." I nodded, swallowing a knot in my throat. Something between pride and grief. Not for what was happening, but for how long we'd let it happen. She took my hand. "I'm not afraid of him now. Not because of what I found out, but because of what you reminded me, that I still get to choose who I am." I squeezed her fingers. "You always did." In the hallway, Craig cleared his throat loud enough for us to hear. A subtle summons, an old pattern, but she didn't flinch, didn't move. Just gave me a final nod. "Go. Pack your things," she said. "I've got this." And for the first time in my life, I believed her completely. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was stepping out from under him and standing tall in the light. It was a Thursday evening, sharp with the first real bite of fall in the air, when my phone rang. I was walking back from work, a paper bag of groceries in one hand, and the other fumbling with my keys when the screen lit up. "Missoula Police Department," I answered, voice cautious. "Mr. Bishop, this is Officer Jansen. We're contacting you as a courtesy. A Mr. Craig Henson has been taken into custody for financial fraud and possession of a controlled substance without a prescription. We understand you may be listed as a witness in connection with an ongoing investigation." For a second, I just stood there, feet planted on the sidewalk, bag crinkling under my arm, cars passing in a blur. Not surprised, not elated, just still. "Thank you," I said. "I appreciate the call." He confirmed that Craig had been arrested an hour ago at the house, without incident. Charges were formal, evidence strong. After I hung up, I stared at the mountains painted gold by the last light of day. I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't want to shout or cry or celebrate. What I felt was cleaner, simpler. Closure. I unlocked the door to my apartment and set the groceries down before dialing. "Mom." She picked up immediately, her voice calm and braced as if she already knew. "They arrested him," I said. "Financial records, unprescribed pills, it's all official now." There was a long pause. "I'm at June's," she said, sitting on her porch, just watching the wind. I thought I'd feel scared when this day came, but I don't. I just feel done. She didn't mean defeated. She meant done with being controlled, minimized, ignored. Good, I said. You deserve done. We talked a little longer. About her lawyer, the recovery of her accounts, the quiet she was, rediscovering in her sister's house. It was the kind of conversation we'd never had before. Not mother to child, but person to person. Survivors. I'm proud of you, Andrew, she said. I'm proud of you too, Mom. And I meant it more deeply than anything I'd ever said. Because we hadn't just escaped Craig. We'd unlearned the belief that we ever needed someone like him in the first place. I reached the ridge just as the last edge of the sun dropped below the mountains. Missoula lay below me, tucked into the basin like a town exhaling. The lights were beginning to flicker on. Porches, traffic, office towers far in the distance. For a long moment, I just stood there, breathing. The trail had been steep in spots. My legs burning by the time I reached the top, but I hadn't rushed. Every step felt earned. The kind of climb you take when you're leaving something behind without needing to slam the door. I sat on the flat stone where I used to come as a teenager when the world felt too loud. Back then, it had been for silence. Tonight, it was for clarity. From my backpack, I pulled it out, the travel mug, the one Craig had filled with more than coffee. I turned it in my hands, feeling the slight dent on the side, the chipped edge on the lid. I'd kept it these past weeks not out of sentiment, but as a kind of quiet evidence, a reminder of what had almost happened, of what I'd seen clearly, just in time. It wasn't about revenge. Not anymore. Craig had already lost more than he understood. Our respect, our trust, our silence. What remained now was mine to define. The wind stirred, pushing through the pines in soft waves. I set the mug down among the rocks, not hidden, just placed, like laying a piece of armor I no longer needed. No anger, no curse, just a release. Below, the lights of the city twinkled like stars, and somewhere down there, life was continuing. My new job, my quiet studio, my mother in a home that finally felt like hers. I thought about her voice on the phone that night, steady, strong. I thought about the look in her eyes when she said, "Start your life." I had. I stood slowly, brushing dust from my palms. The mug stayed behind, just another forgotten thing on a mountaintop. I didn't need to carry it anymore. As I walked back down the path, the weight in my chest felt lighter, my footsteps steady. For the first time in years, I wasn't surviving someone else's world. I was building my own.